America, land of the free, the year is 1902. It has been more than 3 years since the Treaty of Paris, and the American forces have been occupying the Philippine archipelago for more than 3 years now. Forces stationed in the archipelago have expended a considerable amount of resources due to the recurring insurgencies by natives in the island. The anti-imperialist parties have made their voices that such occupation in the islands are deemed unreasonable and they should be given their own government. One man proposed for a change of how the Philippines should be handled. Instead of the militaristic nature, the Philippines should be handled using civil ways. This guy is Henry A. Cooper, a U.S. representative from Wisconsin. He proposed that the Organic Act of 1902, or an act temporarily to provide for the administration of the affairs of civil government in the Philippine Islands and for other purposes. God, that was long. This act is also called the Cooper Act in honor of its writer. In March of 1902, under the 57th Congress of the United States, was proposed this act. Now, let me explain the contents of this act. Section 1. The President shall create a Philippine Commission, Civil Governor and Vice Governor of the Philippine Islands, and 4 executive departments of government, namely Departments of the Interior, Department of Commerce and Police, Department of Finance, Department of Justice, and of Public Instruction. All laws passed in the Philippines shall be or shall have, quote, by authority of the United States, be enacted by the Philippine Commission as its enacting clause. Section 2. The President of the United States shall have land of duties and taxes collected at all ports and places in the Philippine Islands upon occupation of U.S. forces, provided that it shall not repel the, quote, an act temporarily to provide revenue for the Philippine Islands and for other purposes of March 1902. Section 3. The President of the United States is allowed to continue its regulations and control of commercial activities within the Philippine Islands unless the armed resistance subsides. Section 4. From 11th, 1899, all the inhabitants of the Philippine Island is recognized as a Filipino citizen unless they still swear allegiance to the Spanish monarchy. Section 5. No law shall be made to deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny to any person therein the equal protection of the laws. The Bill of Rights is discussed in this section. Section 6. When insurrections in the Philippine Island stops, a census shall be made to all the inhabitants of the island. The Philippines may ask for the help of Census Bureau under the agreement of the President of the United States. Section 7. After the census, an assembly will be held. Delegates from different parts of the country will be invited, and each region shall have a representative of not less than 1. Section 8. After the assembly has been held, the 2 houses shall select 2 commissioners that will be sent to the United States as representative for the Philippines in the United States Congress. The Supreme Court. Section 9. The Supreme Court and the courts of first instance of the Philippines shall have jurisdiction to the Philippine Islands in accordance to what is given to the Philippine government. The Philippine government may also change the practice and method of procedure. Chief Justice and Associate Justices of the Supreme Court are appointed by the President of the United States, and the judges of the Court of First Instance shall be appointed by the civil governor, to which no one can change the decision of the Supreme Court and the Courts of First Instance except the U.S. Congress. Section 10. The U.S. government shall have jurisdiction to review, revise, reverse, modify, or affirm the judgments made by the Philippine Supreme Court. The U.S. is allowed to interfere the decisions of the Philippine Supreme Court if the matter discussed affects them or the payment exceeds $25,000. Section 11. The Philippine government is allowed to improve Philippine agriculture in order to improve the living of the Filipino people by improving harbors and navigable waters. Section 12. All of the properties acquired in the Philippine Islands under the Treaty of Paris shall be given to the military except those provided in this act. Section 13. The Philippines government shall be given the right to classify their lands according to agricultural character and productiveness and be allowed to sell, lease, and etc. as per confirmation by the United States President. Section 14. The Philippine government is authorized to enact rules and regulations and to prescribe terms and conditions to people owning land in the island prior to the Treaty of Spain and the Americans yet failed to register their land under this act. The Philippine government is also allowed to give public lands that were occupied by a native or his ancestor to individuals as long as it does not exceed 16 hectares. Section 15. The Philippines shall have the authority to sell lands that are not timber and mineral lands to individuals under the conditions that such land shall not exceed 16 hectares. Such land shall be cultivated and improved within 5 years after the purchase, but this rule shall not apply to transfer of rights and inheritance. Section 16. Selling of native lands turned to public lands shall be in the hands of native settlers under the condition that the original owner shall be informed with their consent, and also failure to do so is illegal. From Section 17 to Section 62, the conservation of natural resources is tackled. Due to the numbers of sections regarding the conservation of natural resources, we will just tackle on some of its main points. Timbers, trees, forest, and forest products shall not be destroyed or removed without the confirmation of the U.S. government, and the revenue from selling this shall be put into national treasury. Timber lands that are declared as more useful in agriculture than forest by forestry bureaus can be sold as long as the government has provided a license to cut, harvest, or collect timber on these lands. The government is responsible to release laws and regulations to the protection of water supply and their fair distribution to its constituents. Those that have rights to use water for mining, agricultural, and other purposes under law, court decision, or local customs shall also be protected in par of those in public domain. Any project they make shall be acknowledged, but any damage or injury to the public domain shall be under their name. Any person 21 years old and above, residents of the United States or the Philippines, shall have authority to claim coal-containing lands, which 64 hectares of land for an individual and 128 hectares for organizations as long as they follow regulations under this act and pay $25 per hectare. All claims must be reported to the provincial secretary within 60 days of actual possession of the property. Only a single entry per person or association is given. If a person is a member of the association that owns an entry, he or she shall not be eligible for his or her own separate individual entry. Mining rights on public lands in the Philippine Islands shall be in accordance with this act after its passing. All public land in the Philippines, valuables from minerals, shall be reserved from sale except otherwise expressly directed by law. All valuable mineral deposits in public lands in the Philippine Islands, both surveyed and unsurveyed lands, are declared to be free and open to exploration, occupation, and purchase. From Section 63 to Section 65, the authority of the Philippine Islands government to purchase lands of religious orders and others and issue bonds for purchase price is tackled. Section 66 to 73 talks about the municipal bonds for public improvements. Section 74 and 75 talks about franchises in Philippine Islands. Section 76 to 83 talks about the creation, laws, and regulation regarding Philippine coins. Section 84 to 86 talks about maritime vessels, goods, and tariff. Section 87 talks about Bureau of Insular Affairs. Section 88, that all acts and parts of acts inconsistent with this act are hereby repelled. The act was enacted on July 1st, 1902. On July 4th, 1902, the Philippine-American War was also officially ended. 2 years after the act was passed, the census conducted and published on March 25th, 1905. The Philippine Assembly elections of 1907 were held on July 30th, 1907, and on October 16, 1907, the first Philippine legislature was inaugurated. After 14 years of effectivity, the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 was replaced by Jones Law. During President Roosevelt's time, particularly in his middle term, the American citizens has viewed that the American involvement in the Philippines has become an unprofitable and costly, which forced him to comment that we shall have to be prepared for giving the islands independence of a more or less complete type much sooner than I think advisable. Thus, the idea of a law that could free the Philippines from the clutches of the United States was already in mind. Congressman William Jones started his draft of the Jones Law as early as 1910s. During the 1912 election campaign, President Woodrow Wilson used the sentiment of American citizens with regards to the Philippines as one of his campaign promises, hinting that if he shall win, the Philippines shall have its own independence. After he won president, Wilson agreed to give the Philippines its independence, but the time of when it would be given would not be fixed, but only when he deemed it suitable. President Manuel L. Quezon, one of the resident commissioner of that time, made the adjustments to the law for which it fit President Wilson's criteria. This act is known as an act to declare the purpose of the people of the United States as to the future political status of the people of the Philippine Islands and to provide a more autonomous government for those islands or Jones Laws after the author William Jones. The bill entered the House on 1913 and was passed on the same year. Then, on August 29, 1916, the bill has officially become a law under the signature of President Wilson. Under this act, many changes in the Philippines have been made due to the changes in policies of how the U.S. handled the Philippines and also due to the efforts of Governor General Francis Burton Harrison.